What's up, YouTube? Bill Faulkner with Faulkner Custom Rods, coming to you once again from the rod shop. A lot of requests for finished videos, so by popular demand, second video in the series about applying finish. The first one, which you can find on my YouTube channel, Faulkner Custom Rods, is about applying guide wrap finish. And so this one is obviously going to be about applying butt wrap finish. And just so you know, stay tuned. Next week I'll drop a third video, the final in the series. It's going to be pretty in-depth, going to be going into common finish problems and how to solve them, how to avoid them, how to solve them if you find yourself in that situation. So hopefully that'll be helpful. To recap a little bit of what we talked about in the guide wrap video, I get more inquiries and questions about finish than the next 10 things combined. And you know, finish is very, very important to you as a custom builder. And to recap, it's the final step in the process. So if you get everything else right and then botch your finish job, you've got a botched rod. And it's one of the most easy to assess quality characteristics that even a prudent layperson, someone who's not even a fisherman, can look at a rod, and if the finish work is sloppy and uneven, they're going to look at it and say, this kind of looks like not a very high quality product. And so it's really important you get it right, because it's sort of the final step, and it just such a outward and visible sign of quality and mastery. So as I always say in every video, there's more than one way to do everything. So you know, if you are consistently getting a high quality finish on your butt wraps and you're happy, I would encourage you to change nothing. Keep doing what you're doing. You've got it nailed. But if you're not happy with your results, or really, to me, the most common scenario is people are happy with some, but not totally consistent. Some turn out okay, some turn out poorly, and are trying to kind of figure out how to fix that. Then I would, you know, all I'm trying to do here is show the way that I do it. I know a lot of really good builders who do it differently than I do. We should measure the success of the process by the outcome. So if you're getting a great result, then you have a great process, and it doesn't need to be the same as mine. You don't have to use the same products as me. You don't have to use the same techniques as me. The only point in sharing these is to try to help new builders and people that are struggling with finish to think about one way that works for at least one rod builder, right? With that, I'll share my process. A couple of things you got to think about, and again, at risk of repeating myself, if you want consistent results, you need to do everything exactly the same every time. So again, we're going to measure and mix the same every time. We're going to apply exactly the same every time. We're going to control conditions in the shop, so it's always the same temperature and humidity. As nearly as we can control it, we've got some variation that's tolerable there. So the other thing that I think is overlooked sometimes, and I probably should have said this first, when you are applying your finish on your butt wraps and on your guide wraps, and when you're rotating it after application, the rod needs to be dead level. All of these finishes will level. If you don't believe me, mix a batch and pour it onto aluminum foil. Does it stay in the shape of the cup, or does it spread out and get completely flat? They all level. So if you're getting a result that's not level, it's something that you're doing, and the most common thing is that the rod is not completely level. So don't lose sight of that. Another thing that gets really important with butt wrap finish is keep your shop clean. And if you can, control your airflow, use air filters, whatever. You don't want to be moving around. You don't want to be wearing, you know, clothing that drops a lot of lint, really shaggy fleeces, or things that have a lot of static electricity that are going to make things gravitate to you while you're working close to the rod. I know that sounds silly, but it's much easier to avoid lint in the finish than it is to correct it or fix it, even though it's fixable. We talked about in the guide wrap video, you got to be willing to use at least 2 coats. For butt wrap finish, you need to be able to use as many coats as necessary. And I honestly don't know when I start a rod how many coats I'm going to need. It's usually 2 or 3, but it could be more. And I've never seen it be less than 2. So, you know, I often won't know if this is the final coat on a rod until it's set up and I look at it, and is it perfect or is it not? And if it is, I'm done. Great. If it's not, then I'm going to either correct mistakes or go with one more coat to get it where I want it to be. More coats just give you a lot of options, a lot of control, the ability to correct mistakes. So I know it seems like a lot of work, but again, if you're not willing to go the extra mile, you've done an elaborate piece of thread work and you're not willing to put 2 or 3 coats on it, then I guess I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. So Final thing, again, disclaimer, I use some heat in my process. I apply some heat to the finish for purposes of bubble release and for purposes of leveling. And so, you know, I'm not responsible or liable for any stupid human tricks you pull while applying heat to your finish. You need to be very careful. You need to know that flame is dangerous. You can cause a fire, you can burn your blank, you can burn your finish, you can burn your thread, but you can also very easily apply a gentle and controlled amount of heat like I do using a very simple everyday lighter and have no trouble. So with that, let's dive in. All right, so what does a perfect butt wrap finish look like? So what I want is complete even coverage of the wrap or inscription area. You got no thread poking through, got no bubbles or haze or imperfections, you got no fuzzies or lint or dust. We want coverage off the wrap onto the end of the blank with a very even edge and sort of a consistent diameter or distance off the end of the wrap, and it needs to be dead level. I want to be able to look down it like looking down a gun barrel and see no waves or variation, just dead straight. And if you are not sure whether you're getting it or not, if you will look at the glare light line from the lights overhead, and you can see it here in this photo, it should be dead straight and uninterrupted. The camera doesn't lie. So what are you going to need? You're going to need a high quality rod finish. And I use only Flex Coat and now lately Gen 4. If you never use Gen 4, it's the easiest product I've ever used. I recommend it. You need syringes to measure and a spatula and a cup to mix. I use a 200 RPM motor to apply the finish at speed for butt wraps. This is not absolutely essential, but boy does it make it easy to get a consistent level coat and to do so quickly. I've always used the Flex Coat GM200 motor, but lately I've been using this new machine that they call the variable speed DC gear motor. Awesome and very reasonably priced. I'll probably do a video reviewing it because I think it's that good a product. And then from there, you're going to need a brush. I either like the Flex Coat 1/4 inch yellow brushes, not an imitation, the actual Flex Coat brush, or a flat synthetic brush, disposable synthetic brush. You're also going to need potentially a clean razor blade that's very sharp to clean up fuzzies, some tweezers to pick lint or dust out of the finish, and a couple of Bic lighters to apply heat and remove bubbles. And then finally, the last thing, so we don't lose sight of it, a level. These are bubble levels. They're cheap. You can get them lots of places, but to help you make sure that before you apply and once you're rotating to cure, you have your rod level. Don't want to be pedantic here, but just to prove the point, I'm mixing my finish. This is a time-lapse video and it kind of looks funny, but I'm mixing it exactly like I mixed it for the guide wrap video. It took exactly 3 minutes and 5 seconds, so do everything the same. Now, here we have a butt section of a CTS slow motion 6.6 slow pitch jigging blank in golden olive. Beautiful color from them, custom paint job on the seat. And here I go. So we've got our finish mixed, and I'm using the brush, and I'm just slowly putting it on. I'm putting a heavy, wet bead, if you will, and then I back up and go a little behind where I last applied finish and add some more. And I'm just doing this to get it really wetted out and even. With this G4, you can very easily see where you've applied finish and where you haven't yet. And so you don't have any gaps, so I'm starting kind of right at or behind where I left off. I load up the brush and I put it on the area to be finished. Kind of self-explanatory, but I mentioned that you really want the real Flex Coat brush. The difference between cheap hobby brushes and that brush are the density and the stiffness of the bristles. And this is a flat synthetic brush with relatively stiff bristles, and I just really like the control that it gives me. So I go all the way to the end, and then it's hard to see here, but I'm not going over with the bristles. I'm pushing a bead of finish over onto the blank. And then because I'm using this Flex Coat variable speed DC gear motor, it has a slip clutch. I can just grab it and stop it. And I can use the brush either almost like a spatula or to push a bead of finish that's a very consistent thickness off the wrap onto the blank. And you probably wanted about 3 to 4 thread thicknesses wide onto the blank, not too wide. Wide looks sloppy to me personally. So now I'm just going back over, I'm adding a little bit of extra. Oops, I caught there, so I'm gonna add a little more and just making sure that we've got kind of an even level coat. And you can think of this almost like cutting threads on a machine lathe. By keeping the rod turning quickly and keeping the brush moving, I'm sort of pushing a bead of finish. And as long as the bead is consistent, I know I've got like a consistent thickness. And you can see, you almost get like this screw thread pattern there as I go onto the brown. And this is the last thing I do. I'm just going to do some long, these are really light, very almost tickling strokes, like very, very light pressure, just the weight of the brush pressure to just even out. And you can see on the dark brown section, dark olive section to the right, you could see kind of screw thread looking marks or trails from the brush, and they're gone once I've done those flat strokes. Now I'm going here, and I can see a couple of bubbles here and there that have released from my Fuji No CP Ultra Poly thread that I use for my JTOB kind of inlays. I've also got some Fuji, old vintage Fuji HT Electrometallic gold thread trim, and both of those release a lot of bubbles. So I'm just hitting those areas where I know there are bubbles where I can see them. And now I'm going to turn the motor on here in a second and just hit the whole thing with a little bit of, I've got a specific bubble or flaw I'm looking at there, and I popped it. So now I'm just letting this rotate, and I'm going to hit it with some even heat, and I can see that I've got a couple of fuzzies here. So I've grabbed a really precision pair of tweezers, and I'm going to go in and literally, you'll see things in the finish. I don't know if you can see this. It's really hard to see when you grab it, but if you have an imperfection, it's going to be one of three things. You either have, I'm trying to show it to you there, it's a little piece of lint. Probably came off my t-shirt, could have been floating in the air, and I pulled it right out, and that blemish is gone. If you have flaws, it's going to either be a thread sticking up from underneath, which I'm not very worried about in this coat because my JTOBs, some of the tie-off areas may stick out, and that's okay. I know I'm going to do at least one more coat, so I'm not that worried about things sticking up. But it's a good habit. If you don't get bubbles now, you can't get them. So pop all your bubbles. And then if it's not a fuzzy or a stick up sticking up through, and if it's not a bubble that pops with a gentle application of heat, then it's got to be fuzz or lint or something. And that's what I use the tweezers for. It's really hard to capture on film. Doc Ski and his YouTube channel, James Lebanowski, great guy, great builder, has taught me and a lot of other people a lot for years. Has a great video where he actually has close-up camera work and shows kind of a piece of lint or fuzz and using these tweezers to get it out. And that's who I learned the technique from. But the point is, put on your finish, level it out with those long strokes, and then just look at your wrap. And if you have imperfections that you can see now, they're going to be there when you're finished with the wrap. So go ahead and address them. I clean the extra finish and the fuzzy off each time, and then I turn the motor back on so it just doesn't run and sag on me. Although G4, the Gen 4, does a really good job of staying where you put it. So again, I'm just, normally I would do this under magnification. I'm a little challenged because I can't run the camera easily and run my magnifier, but I'm just looking, and I'll pick pop it if it's a bubble. If it's fuzzy or a piece of lint, pick it out and then hit the finish with a little bit of heat so it levels back out again. And I'm just really meticulously, closely looking at every single inch of this wrap to make sure I get everything. And if you see something that's an imperfection, get it out. If it won't move, if you can't pop it, try popping it with the lighter. And if it doesn't pop, it's not a bubble, then you stick it with the tweezers. If it doesn't move, it's a sticky or a fuzzy that you're going to have to cut off after this coat. If it moves, then it's a piece of lint. You just keep messing with it till you get it. So then once you've done that, that's it. I'm putting it on the turner, and I'm going to let it rotate for 3 or 4 hours at 74 to 76 degrees. You can see here, I've actually got a fuzzy, a stick up. There it is. You see, it's the tag from my tie off. I'm going to not worry about dealing with that now. I'm going to deal with that once this first coat is set. So now the first coat is set. And it's dry. This is completely cured. This is 12 hours later, and I start to inspect the wrap. And right there you can see that fuzzy we just looked at, or the stick up. I call it a fuzzy, I don't know. But it's a thread nub that's protruding from the wrap. And here's another one down here at this end. And again, you want to eliminate gaps, and you want to eliminate stick-ups of like my off-white trim here. But if it's a fuzzy of the same color, you can easily trim it. So I've got a clean, very sharp, very new razor blade, and I'm just trimming that piece that's standing up proud of the wrap. So I got the one trimmed off on that end. You can see it's gone. And I'm going to trim off this one here. You are not making a deep cut. You're making a very light cut with the blade very parallel to the blank. But you're just going to go through, and everywhere there's an imperfection that's sticking up, just trim it off. The only exception is I have some imperfection here around my label. And I don't know why Gen 4 does this, but it does this almost always on the first coat, but it covers it perfectly on the second coat, so there's no need to panic. You don't need to freak out. We're just going to do a second coat. But in the event that my label's sticking up, I don't want to trim that because that may impact the way the label looks. So here I have changed the camera angle. I've mixed the coat of finish exactly the same way for about 3 minutes, and I'm going to put it in the 200 RPM turner. And we're going to apply our second coat of finish to this butt wrap. This will probably be the last coat. And you can see my rod's wobbling a little, so I just grab it and rotate it in the chuck and smooths right out. Great, these self-centering, self-aligning chucks that FlexCoat uses. The hand's going to be in the way here for a second, and that won't last, but I wanted to show you a different camera angle just so you can see. You saw the first coat kind of from rod level, and now I'm showing you the second coat kind of from your perspective above. Typically I would hold the brush a little more vertical, but I'm trying to be out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just, if you look, I'm not stabbing the brush into the finish. I'm scooping up, stroking down and scooping up. That creates less bubbles. Finish, loading up the brush with finish, and starting right where I left off, and then sort of inching it out. And as soon as it gets too thin or I don't have a bead pressing out, you saw the bead there, now it's kind of gone. I add more finish and keep going. And right now the whole purpose is just to get a good coat on the entire wrap, make sure there's no dry spots and everywhere is covered. Doesn't have to be terribly level now. We're going to go back and level it out in a minute. And you didn't see me take this step, but I completely made sure the rod was level using my string level before I ever started turning. So now I'm just going back and forth, and you can see you control where your brush hits the rod and what part of your brush you're using. And I got a little too far there and it caught. You can kind of just push a bead of finish in front of the brush, and when you do that back and forth a few times, it's just real level. So now I'm going to carefully edge the wrap again, and I'm just pushing a bead. The bristles are not going off. I'm just pushing a bead off onto the rod. Then with the slip clutch that the FlexCoat turning motor has, I'm just grabbing it so it's not spinning. And I'm very carefully, it looks like I'm going way over. It looks kind of sloppy, but I'm actually just barely going off onto the edge of the blank. Now I've checked kind of for dry spots, and just again, I'm pushing a bead, making sure, and you can see it almost leaves like a screw thread like texture behind the brush, and that's okay. As long as they're even in size, it means you've got sort of even finish. Now I hit a dry spot where I didn't have a bead. I'm just looking for the bead to remain consistent up and down the rod all the way around. I want to be careful to not get too much on top of this wrap and create a bulbous spot. And that's, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to do my lengthwise, gentle strokes, and I'm not trying to move a lot of finish here or scrape a lot. I'm just gently, almost removing those little screw thread texture brush marks. And Gen 4 stays where you put it. It's very easy to work with, really easy and great product, but it will, you do need to do these lateral longitudinal strokes along the axis of the blank to get it dead level. Now I'm going through, and while it's rotating, just hitting it, the lighter is, just like in the guide rep video, several inches below the finish. I'm not sooting it up, and I'm not touching it with the flame, and about 7 minutes in, we're about done. So last thing I'm going to do here before I put it on the turner, you see I've got a little bit of an imperfection there, a little piece of lint or something that got in it. I'm just going to use the tweezers to pull that out. Now I got a piece there, and I'm trying to show it to you in the fixed focus of the camera. And when I'm not working, I'm turning it back on so it's turning and it's not sagging. Then I'm going to come back and check, and I'm just meticulously looking from left to right, right to left, and rotating the rod, and I still am having trouble with this fuzzy. And to be clear, I never ended up getting it despite trying here. And again, I
I can't use my magnifier I normally use that I'm used to having because it obscures or blocks the camera. So after I finished this video, I had to turn off the camera and get the magnifier out. I was able to get that fuzzy. But here it's kind of confounding me. I can't tell if it's a bubble because I can't seem to grab it. So I'm hitting everything again with the lighter. Just make sure there's no bubbles. Looking for any imperfections. Looks pretty good. If you pay close attention around my logo decal, you see that dry spot where the finish was kind of peeling back after the first coat. It's no longer doing that. And I don't really know why Gen 4 does that with decal connection decals and the way that I apply them. But again, it's never a problem because it covers beautifully with the second coat. And so, I wouldn't panic about it. And that's all. We're like 8 minutes in and I'm done. And now I put it on a 6 RPM dryer with the Fuji chuck, which will never, ever, ever drop the rod. I got mine from Southwest Custom Rods. You can get them directly from Fuji. And there you go. We got a really good level coated finish. So again, to stress consistency, it doesn't matter what rod I'm doing. Here I'm doing a big 8-foot live bait saltwater boat rod with a kind of a shaded chevron 8-axis wrap. I'm applying my finish exactly the same way. Here's a big, long, purple metallic dragon scale. This thing is like 13 inches long and is going to have the first guide and the guide train wrapped over it. So this is the under wrap and the butt wrap. I'm applying finish exactly the same way. And this is what you're looking for. If you will consistently get in a routine, same measurement, same brush, same everything. Here I've applied it to another CTS slow pitch jigging blank. There's a bubble, hit it, it's gone. Now I'm just inspecting it. I mean, I'm literally, the wraps change, the colors change, the lengths change, the blank diameters change, but I keep doing everything exactly the same.
All right, so hopefully that was helpful. Again, lots of ways to do it, just the way that I do it. Hopefully you picked up a tip or a trick here or there that's going to help you. So I want to cover a couple of things in closing. First of all, and you've heard me say this before, wash your hands. Every time before you enter the shop, doing your thread work, doing your finish work, always wash your hands. And, butt wraps, we're applying decals and inscriptions and all that, particularly thread work, elaborate thread work. That's really a time when contamination is a risk, and it very often comes from your own hands. So always wash your hands. Another piece of advice I give people all the time, either new people or that are struggling, is just avoid this silver bullet mentality where you feel like if you can just find the right product, everything's going to be fine. I would highly recommend you pick a product that has the performance characteristics and qualities you're looking for and stick with it. Change your technique, don't change the product. In my experience, it's highly unusual that if you're putting it on too thick or your rod's not level or you got some kind of issue, that just simply changing the product is going to fix it for you, right? So you really need to, harsh as it sounds, you need to focus on you and what you need to change to be successful. In my experience, historically, Flex Coat is the easiest product for most people to get a great result with, and it's very consistent. There's a new product, Gen 4. I've used it extensively. I actually helped test it. I've been using it for 6 months. I get no promotional consideration from Access Outdoor Products, but it is the easiest finish and the best finish I've ever used by a margin. So if you're on the fence, if you don't have a favorite, really recommend you check it out, just because it's just so well designed. It's not a repurposed product that was designed for something else. It was formulated by the guy who brought us Threadmaster initially from the ground up to be a game-changing rod finish, and it's really that good. So if you're having trouble, or even if you're not, try it. I think you'll like it. Again, hopefully what you get out of this video is, and I hate to sound like a broken record, be very, very consistent. Do everything the same way every time. And then really, I think you probably see you don't need to do that much to it. I'm just applying it evenly. I'm sort of evening it out with longitudinal strokes, warming it a bit, and making sure there's no obvious flaws or defects. Either bubbles or lint or whatever, and then you just get out of the way and let it do its thing. And I'd recommend you do the same thing. Just apply it evenly on a level rod and get out of the way, and most of the time you're going to be happy with the results. Obviously use light coats. I mean, I think the biggest thing, even with experienced builders, and we'll talk about this in the next video about fixing problems, is getting this sort of wavy, uneven finish. And you know, that means you got more finish in one place than in other places, and that's how you get waves. So go lighter, right? And either remove all the excess you can or just put it on thinner in the first place. All of these finishes will level, so as long as you don't do something that challenges it or makes it hard for it to level, it's just physics, it's chemistry, it's going to do the same thing every time. So use light coats, and regardless of what you think is causing your problems, a lot of times you can solve everything just by doing exactly what you're doing but using lighter coats. So try it. If you're gonna recoat, you know, I mentioned I always use 2, often 3, sometimes more. I always try to recoat within 24 hours. I don't want to pretend to be anything I'm not. I'm not a chemist. I'm not a chemical engineer. But those people I know who have explained the way these things, these polyamine resin systems, these 2-part epoxy resins that we use for finish and glue and things work. They sort of bond and become one coat if you recoat within 24 hours. So I'm usually going to wait at least 6 hours. Maybe if I'm in a huge hurry, I'm going to heat the shop way up and do it within 4 hours, but I don't like doing that. Bad things happen when you get in a hurry. But try to keep all your coats within 24 hours of the last coat. And while I can't really explain the molecular level chemistry to you on that, I can tell you that on rods I've had to take apart or repair that I built, I could tell when I had let more than 24 hours pass between a coat of finish, because what I got was like layers in an onion, not kind of a solid unified mass. So try to recoat within 24 hours. That works for me. This one's going to sound a little funny, but it's been learned the hard way from experience over 25 years. I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and we get big thunderstorms year round, but especially in the spring and the summer. Don't plan to do a bunch of finish work when you have big storms and you're at risk of losing power. It's a bad day when your wife and kids are wanting you to hook up the generator and save the fish tank in the freezer, and you're having to hook it up to your shop because you got 4 rods turning and the power went out. So if you're at risk for severe weather, leave it out. Wait until the next day. It's just not worth the trouble. And then really, this is probably the single most helpful tip I could give you, and I'm kind of deliberately saving it for the end. Both with guide wrap finish and with butt wrap finish, I always, 100% of the time, go back after I'm done applying. 30 minutes later, I check it. An hour later, I check it. And often what I find is everything's fine, it's just the way I left it, and no action is required. But you might be surprised how often checking back in 30 minutes saves you heartache. The rod has fallen out of the dryer, something has fallen over in the shop, and you've got dust or lint or some foreign object, fly. That's happened for me. Mosquitoes have gotten in the finish. Bubbles will appear sometimes. I'm not sure why that is. It happens more with some brands of thread than others, but it's almost like some threads have late thread release. You got to really be careful of it, in my experience, with metallics and NCP threads. So it's just the tiniest little thing, and it doesn't seem like much, but don't just put it on the dryer and walk away and check it the next day. Check it 30 minutes later, check it an hour later. It will pay off if you'll do that, I promise. So hopefully this was helpful. Really appreciate you tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Always open to new topics, and really looking forward to the next video, which is going to be, you know, finish doesn't always turn out right. So when you get a problem, when you have an issue, what are the common issues? What are the common problems? What are the common scenarios? And what are the ways to fix them? And so that should be a good one. Hopefully you'll tune back in and watch. Until then, appreciate your support and tight lines.